The horizon swallowed the sun, pulling the warmth from the air in a single steady motion. As the light retreated, the forest floor transformed. What had been soft, dappled ground turned into a network of jagged, reaching shadows. Each tree trunk stretched its dark silhouette across the moss, carving deep lines into the earth. The ancient oak stood at the center of this change, its gnarled roots becoming anchors in the deepening gloom. High above, the leaves stopped their gentle rustle, caught in the sudden stillness that follows the day. The temperature dropped, carrying the scent of damp earth and cooling pine needles. Every branch became a silhouette against the fading orange glow of the sky. The transition was absolute. The world of color vanished, replaced by a monochrome landscape of gray, black, and deep indigo. The forest held its breath, waiting for the shift, from the rhythm of the sun to the pulse of the night. In the hollow of the oak, the silence deepened, thick and expectant. The wind died down, leaving only the sound of the cooling wood contracting. The transition was complete. The night had arrived. Inside the hollow, the young owl shifted her weight. Her talons dug into the rough, uneven bark, finding purchase against the slight sway of the ancient oak. She watched the opening. Two shapes detached from the canopy, moving with a fluid, silent grace that defied the heavy air. They launched into the cooling dusk, their wings slicing through the dark without a single sound. She tracked their path until they were mere specks against the indigo sky. Then they vanished entirely. The hollow felt smaller now. The space they had occupied was replaced by a cold, encroaching draft. She turned her head, swiveling it until her eyes locked onto the vast, empty expanse beyond the tree. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythmic, sharp cadence. The forest below was a sea of black shapes, unrecognizable and deep. She leaned forward, her grip tightening on the wood. The absence of her parents left a void that pressed against her. She tested the air with her beak, sensing the currents that pulled at the leaves. She braced her legs, feeling the tension coil in her muscles, and stared into the dark, waiting for the courage to step into the void. She pushed off. The branch recoiled under her feet, a sharp snap of wood echoing in the quiet. Gravity claimed her instantly. She plummeted, the air rushing past her ears with a high, thin whistle that sounded like a warning. Her wings snapped open, but they were stiff, catching nothing but empty space. She tumbled, a chaotic blur of feathers in frantic motion. Panic flared in her chest, a sudden, hot tightening that made her beat her wings harder, faster, in a desperate, uneven rhythm. She was falling too fast. The ground rushed up, a blur of dirt and dead leaves. She twisted her body, banking hard to the right, and felt the sudden, violent resistance of a rising air current. It slammed into her wings, pushing her upward, with a force that knocked the wind from her lungs. She stopped the tumble. Her wings flattened, spreading wide to lock into the invisible stream of air. The frantic beating slowed, smoothing out into long, powerful strokes. She climbed the forest floor, falling away as she rose toward the canopy. She was no longer falling. She was flying. A pine branch loomed ahead, swaying in the night breeze. She aimed for the thickest part, but her timing was off. She hit the needles with too much speed, her talons skidding across the slick, resinous bark. The branch dipped sharply under her weight, swinging like a pendulum. She flapped her wings in a jagged, uneven motion, fighting to keep her balance as the wood bucked beneath her. Her chest heaved, each breath a sharp, ragged pool of air that rasped in her throat. She gripped tighter, her talons sinking into the wood, and waited for the motion to dampen. Slowly, the swaying subsided. The forest floor below was no longer just a dark void. It was a complex map of shifting textures. She tilted her head, her ears twitching at the subtle vibrations. The forest was alive, and for the first time, she was listening to its pulse. The forest floor remained a tapestry of shadow, until a single, dry leaf skittered across the packed dirt. The sound was sharp, brittle, and immediate. She froze. Her neck muscles locked, holding her head perfectly still as she tilted it to triangulate the source. Her ears twitched, rotating independently to catch the faint, rhythmic scraping of claws against root and soil. Below the fern, a small, dark shape emerged. It moved in quick, nervous bursts, stopping to sniff the air before darting forward again. She watched, her body coiled and immobile. The fear that had gripped her during the flight evaporated, replaced by a cold, singular clarity. Her pupils began to dilate, expanding until the dark centers of her eyes seemed to swallow the light. She stopped breathing, her chest held tight. Every movement of the mouse was magnified in her vision, a stuttering, frantic dance that she tracked with surgical precision. She shifted her weight, her talons digging deeper into the pine bark, preparing to launch. She was a predator, reading the map of the night. The intensity of the hunt held her, but the forest was vast, and the sheer volume of nocturnal life began to press in. A distant, haunting hoot echoed from the canopy, vibrating through the branch and rattling her focus. The precision in her eyes flickered. She shifted, her talons scraping the wood as she looked away from the fern, overwhelmed by the sudden, layered cacophony of the woods. Then, a weight settled onto the branch beside her. The wood groaned under the new pressure, tilting slightly. A firm, steady presence pressed against her shoulder. Her father had arrived. He nudged her, a deliberate grounding motion that pushed back against her hesitation. The contact was solid, a physical anchor. He remained there, unmoving, his feathers brushing hers. The frantic energy in her chest began to dissipate, replaced by the rhythmic, steady beat of his presence. She stopped scanning the shadows and closed her eyes. She leaned into him, letting the tension drain from her talons. The forest was no longer a chaotic void. It was a map of sounds, and she was finally learning how to read it. The map of the forest solidified in her mind, not as a collection of threats, but as a series of distinct, navigable pulses. She heard the dry snap of a twig 20 yards away and knew exactly the weight of the creature that caused it. She heard the rustle of leaves and identified the wind's direction before it even reached her perch. The haunting hoot that had rattled her moments ago now served as a beacon, marking the boundaries of the territory. She opened her eyes. The darkness was no longer an impenetrable wall. It was a space filled with depth and distance. She shifted her weight, feeling the familiar tension return to her wings. But this time, it was controlled, deliberate. She pushed off the branch. The wood groaned briefly as she released her grip. Then she was airborne. She extended her wings fully, feeling the air catch the underside of her feathers with a firm, welcoming resistance. She glided into the open air, the cool currents rushing against her face. The forest floor blurred beneath her as she picked up speed, the air pressure firming up against her outstretched wings. She felt the lift, a steady, buoyant force that carried her higher. Ahead, a massive trunk rose like a pillar, blocking her direct path. She did not pull up or slow down. Instead, she tilted her left wing, angling the primary feathers to bite into the air. The resistance was immediate, a sharp tug against her shoulder muscles. She leaned into the turn, her body banking sharply to the left. The air current shifted, a sudden, turbulent pocket threatening to push her off course. She reacted instantly, snapping her right wing downward to stabilize her balance. The maneuver was precise, a fluid arc that brought her sweeping around the rough bark of the tree. She felt the change in pressure as she cleared the obstacle. She held the bank for a heartbeat longer, testing the limits of her control before leveling out into the dark space beyond. She was no longer just flying, she was steering. The clearing opened up, a sudden pocket of stillness in the dense woods. A cluster of fireflies ignited, their bioluminescence blooming in a soft, golden pulse that rippled through the dark foliage. She banked toward them, her eyes wide, tracking the erratic, rhythmic blinking that seemed to map the air itself. She approached too quickly, her momentum carrying her past the center of the swarm. She flared her wings, creating a drag that slowed her descent and pivoted in midair. This time, she did not fight the air. She let it carry her. She began to circle, her flight path softening into a fluid, continuous arc. Every time the fireflies pulsed, she adjusted her wing pitch, weaving through the golden light, as if following an invisible thread. The rhythm of her wing beats synced with the blinking of the insects. She dipped, rose, and banked, her body tracing the shape of the light-filled space. She circled again, her trajectory perfectly smooth. The golden pulse of the fireflies continued to drift beneath her, a steady, rhythmic pattern that had lulled her into a state of absolute focus. She banked once more, her wings catching the cool night air in a perfect, practiced arc. Then, the silence of the forest shattered. A heavy branch snapped somewhere in the dense shadows to her right, the sound sharp and violent, echoing through the canopy like a gunshot. The owl jolted mid-glide, her wings snapping shut for a fraction of a second before she forced them open to catch the air. She surged upward, her heart hammering against her ribs, the steady rhythm of her flight replaced by a frantic, jagged beat. She climbed, gaining altitude with every desperate stroke, her eyes wide and unblinking as she scanned the blackness below. She held her position, talons curled tight, her chest heaving as she hovered in the dark. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift, and she did not dare to move. Her gaze locked onto the dense thicket where the branch had fallen. She waited for the forest to reveal its secret. She remained suspended in the dark, her wings locked in a rigid, trembling hover. The forest floor offered no movement, only the oppressive weight of the shadows. Then, a soft, familiar rustle of air brushed against her flank. Her father emerged from the gloom, his flight path silent and deliberate. He did not call out. He simply banked beside her, his wingtips nearly grazing her own, creating a steady, rhythmic wake that cut through her frantic state. She watched him, her pupils constricting as she mirrored his calm, measured cadence. He nudged her shoulder with his beak, a firm, grounding contact that forced her to release the tension in her talons. She stopped the jagged, desperate flapping. Instead, she let her wings go slack, allowing the air to catch them in a long, slow glide. The frantic hammering in her chest began to subside, replaced by the deep, steady pulse of the night. She tilted her head, listening past the ringing in her ears. The forest was settling. The distant hoot of a neighbor returned, and the wind began to whisper. She was no longer a target, but a part of it. The hesitation vanished. She tilted her body forward, tucking her wings tight against her sides to minimize drag. Gravity took hold, pulling her into a steep, accelerating descent. The air whistled past her ears, a sharp, rising pitch. Below, the forest canopy appeared as a chaotic lattice of branches, but she no longer saw it as an obstacle. She saw it as a path. She plummeted toward a narrow opening between two ancient trunks, her vision locked on the sliver of space. Just as she reached the threshold, a stray twig jutted into her trajectory. She did not panic. With a subtle flick of her tail and a micro-adjustment of her left wing, she banked sharply, threading the needle with inches to spare. She flattened out, skimming the underside of a low-hanging pine branch, her talons brushing the needles. She pulled up, the force of the maneuver pressing her against the air, and surged through a secondary gap in the undergrowth. She leveled out from the dive, her momentum carrying her into a steep, upward arc. She began the climb, her wings beating with a heavy, deliberate cadence that pushed against the weight of the night. The air grew thinner and cooler as she gained height, the familiar scent of damp earth fading into the sharp, clean smell of the upper canopy. Suddenly, a cross-current caught her, buffeting her wings and forcing her to tilt violently to the right. She dug her talons into the air, snapping her wings wide to regain balance. The resistance was immense, a physical barrier she had to carve through. She pushed harder, her chest muscles straining with every downstroke, driving herself upward against the invisible pressure. She broke through the final layer of dense foliage, the leaves brushing against her flight feathers like a parting curtain. She reached the highest, sturdiest branch of the ancient oak and landed, her talons gripping the wood with a firm, locking snap. From her high perch, the The world remained a tapestry of muted grays and deep blacks. She scanned the terrain, her head rotating in slow, rhythmic increments to capture every detail. A flicker of movement caught her eye, but it was not prey. It was a dull, rhythmic pulse of light emerging from the valley floor. She leaned forward, talons digging into the branch, her pupils narrowing to sharpen her focus. The light shifted, turning from a faint glimmer into a distinct, winding streak that cut through the dense undergrowth. It was a hidden stream, invisible from the lower canopy. The moonlight struck the surface of the water, transforming the flow into a jagged, shimmering ribbon of silver. She watched the liquid light snake through the dark forest, its surface rippling with a metallic sheen that dazzled her eyes. The contrast was absolute. Where the forest was static and dark, the stream was fluid and alive, reflecting the moon like a polished mirror. She remained perfectly still, her gaze locked on the silver path below. The water caught the light, refracting it into tiny dancing sparks. This was a new layer of the forest, a hidden vein of brightness she had never perceived. She blinked and tracked the silver ribbon as it disappeared into the shadows. She released her grip on the oak, letting gravity pull her forward into the cool night air. Her wings snapped open, not with a frantic beat, but with a wide, sweeping extension that caught the rising thermal. The air pushed back against her flight feathers, providing a firm, invisible platform beneath her. She adjusted her tail, banking slightly to align with the steady breeze flowing over the treetops. The forest floor dropped away, becoming a distant, indistinct blur of shadows. She held her wings perfectly rigid, locking them into a majestic, sweeping arc. The wind hummed against her ears, a constant, rushing sound that signaled her speed. She felt the subtle shifts in the air currents, banking left and right with minimal movement, her body acting as a rudder in the dark sky. Below, the endless carpet of trees stretched toward the horizon. She was moving through it, a silent silhouette against the vast, star-dusted sky. Every muscle in her wings was relaxed. The horizon began to lose its absolute blackness. A thin, pale gray line bled into the sky, softening the sharp edges of the distant mountains. The owl felt the change in the air before she saw it. The temperature rose, and the night breeze lost its crisp, biting edge. She banked right, her wings carving a wide, sweeping arc through the thinning darkness. The forest below began to emerge from the shadows. She caught a sudden updraft, the air pushing against her underside with newfound buoyancy. She dipped her left wing, correcting her course. She turned her focus toward the familiar silhouette of the ancient oak. The light was growing, turning the sky into a muted charcoal wash. She adjusted her tail feathers, tightening her turn as the home tree grew larger. The canopy was no longer a sea of black, but a mosaic of greens. She locked her eyes on the hollow, the target of her long night. She began her descent, pulling her wings in slightly to increase her speed. The forest floor rushed up to meet her, but she remained steady, banking with precision toward the thick, gnarled branches of her home. The ancient oak loomed ahead, its massive trunk a wall of textured bark against the brightening sky. She flared her wings, the sudden resistance of the air slowing her momentum instantly. Her talons reached forward, scraping briefly against the wood before finding a secure hold on the edge of the hollow. She pulled herself inside, the transition from the vast, open sky to the enclosed, dark space of the nest immediate and absolute. The frantic rhythm of her heart began to slow, each beat spreading a heavy, pleasant fatigue through her muscles. She moved deeper into the hollow, her talons clicking against the floor as she navigated the familiar curves of the interior. The air here was still, holding the scent of wood and dry leaves. She shifted her weight, the tension in her wings finally releasing as she tucked them against her sides. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the night drained away, replaced by the heavy, grounding weight of safety. She stood for a moment, her chest rising and falling in a steady, rhythmic cadence. She tucked her wings tight against her body, the soft down of the nest yielding under her weight. The hollow was cool, shielded from the encroaching morning light. She shifted her feet, pressing her talons into the familiar floor, feeling the slight give of the wood and dried moss. A faint draft brushed against her primary feathers, a lingering reminder of the currents she had navigated only moments before. She reached back with her beak, smoothing a ruffled feather on her wing, her movements precise and slow. The air of the night still clung to her, a faint scent of damp earth and pine needles trapped within the layers of her plumage. She adjusted her position again, rotating her body until she found the exact center of the hollow. Her muscles, once coiled and reactive, now slackened, the tension bleeding out into the nest. She pressed her chest against the soft lining, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of her own breathing, synchronized with the stillness of the oak. She tucked her head low, her beak resting against the curve of her shoulder. The physical memory of the night air remained etched in her senses. The first gray light of dawn filtered through the small opening of the hollow, casting a faint, pale glow on the interior walls. Outside, the rhythmic hooting of the night faded, replaced by the sharp, sporadic chirps of waking songbirds. She did not stir. The transition from the darkness of the hunt to the brightness of the day was a boundary she no longer needed to cross. She pressed her eyelids shut, blocking out the encroaching light. Her talons remained locked in the soft lining of the nest, a final, reflexive grip on the safety of the tree. The memory of the wind against her wings remained sharp. She was no longer the novice who had hesitated on the branch, but a hunter who had claimed the night. She let go of the last remnants of alertness. The world outside accelerated into the day, but within the hollow, she was still, anchored in the silence of the ancient wood.